I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey Lurkers, welcome to episode 43. For this episode, we're going to be diving into the story of the ghost ship, the Mary Celeste. So you might be wondering what exactly I mean by ghost ship. There's actually two different definitions for this term. One definition would be that the ship is a ghost, that it's a ghost. I was going to say that it's the soul of the ship. You see the ship's soul. But it's more that something happened to the ship and now you're seeing its ghost, which I've said like 5 times. One example of this would be the Flying Dutchman, which is a very popular ghost story that we'll probably cover at some point. The other definition is that it is a ship that is found derelict, adrift with the crew missing or the crew found dead. The Mary Celeste would be the latter category. So the Mary Celeste is a ship that was an actual ship, but it was sailing by itself. I have always actually had a fascination with ghost ships of both kinds, the ghost and the real ship without a crew, since I was a kid. I've mentioned before that I spent a great deal of time on the water on the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries in Virginia. So a love of the water and of ships isn't surprising. And then you throw in my fascination of the paranormal at a young age, and it's not a stretch that these interests would combine into an interest in ghost ships. Today we're going to be talking all about the Mary Celeste. This ghost ship was classified as an actual real-life ship, as I said, that was sailing without the presence of crew. And it is still to this day, for the most part, an unsolved mystery. So let's get the story started, shall we? In late 1860, in the shipyard of Joshua Dewis in the village of Spencer's Island, on the shores of the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia, the keel of a ship was laid out. It was built with local timber, including pine, spruce, birch, and beechwood. There's a joke here that I really want to ask if it was tree wood. There's somebody listening who's going to know exactly what I'm talking about. It was tree wood. The ship was a brigantine, which is a 2-masted ship with a square-rigged foremast and at least 2 sails on the main mast, a square topsail, and a gaff sail, mainsail, behind the mast. The main mast is the second and taller of the 2 masts. Got that? I know everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about. Basically, it was a 2-masted ship. She was built so that her planking was laid edge to edge rather than overlapping. The registration documents describe the vessel as 99.3 feet, or 30.3 meters, long, 25.5 feet, or 7.8 meters, broad, and 11.7 feet, or 3.6 meters, deep. The ship was owned by a consortium of 9 people. Dewis, the builder, was the main owner, and one of the other owners included the captain, Robert McClellan. On May 18, 1861, she was launched and given the name Amazon. I know you're probably wondering why I'm talking about a ship named the Amazon. You're going to find out. Just hang in there. The issue started with this ship at the time of launch, when the ship refused to budge. She was eventually launched and ready for her maiden voyage. June 1861, the Amazon was set to sail to London with a load of timber. Captain Robert McClellan oversaw the loading of the cargo, and the ship set sail. But once it made it to the Atlantic waters, the captain began feeling ill. During the beginning of the voyage, Captain McClellan's condition worsened. Some accounts said the captain would dissolve into coughing fits and was coughing up blood. The decision was made to turn back. When they arrived back at port at Spencer's Island, Captain McClellan died of pneumonia on June 19, 1861. A new captain took over the ship, named John Nutting Parker. I don't know, I think anyone with the name Nutting might not be a good omen. Captain Parker continues the voyage and set off for London to deliver the load of timber. Before they even made it out to sea, the Amazon ran into fishing equipment in the Narrows off Eastport, Maine. Then, when leaving London after delivering her cargo, the ship ran into and sank a smaller ship in the English Channel. I'm telling you, don't hire a captain whose name is Nutting. Nothing good is going to come from it. See what I did there? So Captain John Nutting Parker remained in command for 2 years, where the ship was mostly part of the West Indies trade. In 1863, a new captain took control of the ship, Captain William Thompson, who remained the captain until 1867. This time period was actually quiet. One of the crew of the Amazon wrote, "We went to the West Indies, England, and the Mediterranean, what we call the foreign trade. Not a thing unusual happened." You know, saying that completely jinxed things, right? You never say, it's quiet, or nothing unusual happened. Everything's good. Everything's been going great with this ship. Nothing weird. Because if you say that, you better knock wood big time, because you're in trouble. You totally jinxed it. In October of 1867, the Amazon was driven ashore in a storm in Cow Bay off Cape Breton. The ship was so badly damaged that her owners abandoned her as a wreck. She was then acquired as a derelict by Alexander McBean. In maritime law, derelict means that the ship was abandoned on navigable waters with no hope of being recovered and no expectation of it being returned to its owners. So basically, it amounts to finders keepers. Within a month, Alexander McBean sold the ship to a local businessman who, in November of 1868, sold it to an American mariner from New York named Richard W. Haynes. Haynes paid $1,750 for the ship and then spent $8,825 restoring it. December 1868, he registers the ship in New York as an American vessel with a new name. You guessed it, Mary Celeste. And I want to point out here quickly that there's some information that refers to the ship as the Mary Celeste, but that is not correct. The name of the ship was the Mary Celeste. Also, if the ship didn't already have a questionable, unlucky history, changing its name would basically solidify the fact that it was an unlucky vessel. You did not change the name of a ship. There's two things I know that you don't change the name of. You don't change the name of a ship, and you don't change the name of a horse. Both are unlucky. Legend says that when every ship is christened, its name goes into a ledger of the deep, maintained by Neptune or Poseidon himself. Renaming a ship or boat means you're trying to slip something past the gods, and you will be punished for your deviousness. In October of 1869, the Mary Celeste is seized by Haynes' creditors and sold to a New York consortium headed by James H. Winchester. Over the next 3 years, the members of the consortium changed, though Winchester maintained at least 50% of the ownership. There is no information regarding the Mary Celeste activities during this time period. 1872, the Mary Celeste was refitted. She was basically enlarged so that her length was increased to 103 feet, her breadth to 25.7 feet, and her depth to 16.2 feet. Among the structural changes, a second deck was added. An inspector's report refers to extensions to the poop deck, new transoms, and the replacement of many timbers. On October 29, 1872, the consortium of owners included Benjamin Spooner Briggs, the Mary Celeste's new captain. Benjamin Briggs was born in Massachusetts into a seafaring family. He was married with 2 children, his son Arthur, who was 7, and daughter Sophia, who was 2. He was known to be a highly religious man, reading the Bible regularly, and he was known to be zealous. In October of 1872, Benjamin took command of Mary Celeste for her first voyage following her extensive remodel. She was bound for Genoa, Italy, with 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol. He arranged for his wife and infant daughter to accompany him, while his school-aged son was left at home with his grandmother. Briggs, having been a captain for 18 years, chose his crew carefully. The crew was comprised of men he had either sailed with before or who had come recommended. In a letter to his mother prior to the voyage, he said he was eminently satisfied with ship and crew. October 20th, 1872, Captain Benjamin Briggs arrives at Pier 50 to supervise the loading of the ship's cargo. Again, they were transporting 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol. Denatured alcohol is ethanol that has been mixed with other ingredients. It is not safe to drink. If you pour yourself a glass like you might pour a glass of regular drinking alcohol, it will kill you if you drink it. It's used as a solvent, commonly used as fuel in camping stoves today, and as an ingredient in hand sanitizers. Remember that, that's important. I wanted to stress exactly what denatured alcohol is because when I was younger, I always thought they were carrying barrels of the good alcohol. So on Tuesday, November 5th, 1872, the Mary Celeste with Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, daughter Sophia, and 7 crewmen set off for Italy. The weather was a little iffy, so Captain Briggs anchored off Staten Island to wait for the weather to clear. 2 days later, they pulled anchor and entered the Atlantic Ocean, bound for Italy. While Mary Celeste prepared to sail, the Canadian brigantine De Gratia was anchored nearby in Hoboken, New Jersey, waiting for her cargo of petroleum destined for Genoa via Gibraltar. Captain David Morehouse and First Mate Oliver DeVoe were Nova Scotians, both highly experienced and respected seamen. Captains Briggs and Morehouse shared common interests, and some writers think it likely that they knew each other, if only casually. Some accounts claim that they were close friends who dined together on the evening before Mary Celeste's departure, but the evidence for this is limited to a recollection by Morehouse's widow 50 years after the event. De Gratia departed for Gibraltar on November 15th, following the same general route, but 8 days after Mary Celeste. On December 4th, 1872, the De Gratia, the ship that left New York 8 days after Mary Celeste, made it to a location midway between the Azores and Portugal. When Captain Morehouse came up on deck, the helmsman reported a vessel about 6 miles away heading towards the De Gratia. The unknown ship's erratic movements and the odd set of her sails made Morehouse think that something wasn't quite right with this ship. As he got closer, Morehouse could not see anyone on deck, and there were no replies to his signals. Captain Morehouse decided to send his first mate DeVoe and second mate John Wright to investigate. The 2 men discovered the ship was, in fact, the Mary Celeste, because of the name painted on the stern. When they climbed aboard, they found the ship deserted. The sails were partly set and in poor condition, with some sail missing completely. Most of the rigging was damaged, with ropes hanging loosely over the sides. The main hatch cover was secure, but the fore and lazarette hatches were open and their covers sitting beside them on the deck. According to the Penobscot Marine Museum, a lazarette hatch is usually a storage locker that's used for gear or equipment that a sailor or boatswain would use around the decks on a sailing vessel. It's typically found below the weather deck in the stern of the vessel and is accessed through a hatch from the main deck or through a doorway from below decks. I didn't know what one was. I had never heard of one before. So basically, it's a storage area, and the hatch for that storage area and the fore hatch were both open, and the covers were actually sitting beside them on the deck, not on top or attached. The ship's single lifeboat was small, with 4 to 6 oars, and it was missing, and the binnacle housing the ship's compass had been shifted and the glass cover was broken. There was about 3.5 feet of water in the hold, a significant amount, but not alarming for a ship of the Mary Celeste size. There was a makeshift sounding rod, which is a device used for measuring the amount of water in the hold, lying abandoned on the deck. The ship's daily log was found in the mate's cabin. The final entry was dated 8 a.m., November 25th, 1872, and said simply, 6 miles off Santa Maria, meaning they were within sight of the island of Santa Maria in the Azores. The position of the Mary Celeste, based on the logbook, was 400 nautical miles from the point where she was encountered by the De Gratia. First Mate DeVoe noted that the cabin interiors were wet and untidy from water that had entered through doorways and skylights, but were otherwise in reasonable order. He found personal items scattered around Captain Briggs's quarters, including a sheathed sword under the bed. Most of the ship's papers were missing, along with the captain's navigational equipment. In the galley or ship's kitchen, all the equipment was neatly stored. There was no food prepared or in the process of being prepared. This is a little bit different than some of the accounts that you read. There were some fictitious accounts or exaggerated accounts that appeared that claimed that it appeared that they were in the middle of a meal and everybody just disappeared. That is not the case. Everything was cleaned, put away in the kitchen. There was nothing sitting out, no food sitting out. Everything was in order. There was also plenty of food and water stored, so they were not running out of anything. They had plenty of what they needed for their voyage. There were no obvious signs of fire or violence. In fact, the evidence pointed more towards an orderly departure from the ship by means of the lifeboat. DeVoe returned to the De Gratia to report the findings to Captain Morehouse. The decision was made to take the Mary Celeste into Gibraltar, about 600 nautical miles away. Maritime law stated that someone salvaging a ship could expect a substantial share of the combined value of the rescued vessel and its cargo. The exact amount depended upon the amount of danger involved in salvaging the ship. Captain Morehouse divided his crew of 8, with First Mate DeVoe and 2 men going to the Mary Celeste, and Captain Morehouse and 4 men remaining on the De Gratia. The weather was calm for the remainder of the journey to Gibraltar, but because each ship was undercrewed, the progress was slower than usual. On December 12, 1872, the De Gratia arrived in Gibraltar. The Mary Celeste encountered a strange fog and was delayed until the following morning of December 13th. That doesn't seem ominous at all. The Mary Celeste was immediately impounded by the Vice Admiralty Court to prepare for salvage hearings. First Mate DeVoe wrote to his wife that the ordeal bringing the ship in was such that "I can hardly tell what I am made of, but I do not care so long as I got in safe. I shall be well paid for the Mary Celeste." Salvage court hearings began December 17, 1872, under Sir James Cochrane, the Chief Justice of Gibraltar. The hearing was conducted by Frederick Solly Flood, Attorney General of Gibraltar. The historian described Flood as a man whose arrogance and pomposity were inversely proportional to his IQ, and as the sort of man who, once he had made up his mind about something, couldn't be shifted. Not the sort of person you want at your trial. The testimony of First Mate DeVoe and Second Mate Wright, the first 2 people aboard the Mary Celeste when she was found, convinced Flood that a crime had been committed, which was a belief picked up by the New York Shipping and Commercial List, who said, "The inference is that there has been foul play somewhere, and that alcohol is at the bottom of it. December 23rd, Flood ordered an examination of the ship. This is kind of like an unsolved mystery and true crime and spooky theories all wrapped in one. I promise. This doesn't seem like a typical paranormal story, but in my opinion it is. John Austin, surveyor of shipping, and a diver, Ricardo Portinato, carried out the examination. Austin noted cuts on each side of the bow that he thought were caused by a sharp instrument, and found possible traces of blood on the captain's sword. He did not believe the ship had been struck by bad weather, noting there was a vial of sewing machine oil found upright in its place. The diver reported that the ship had not been involved in a collision, nor did it show signs of running aground. An additional inspection by a group of Royal Naval captains agreed with the opinion of Austin that the cuts on the bow had been caused deliberately, and also discovered stains on one of the ship's rails that might have been blood, along with a deep cut, possibly caused by an axe. These findings bolstered Flood's belief that human wrongdoing was to blame for the mystery, not natural disaster. His conclusion was that the crew had gotten into the alcohol, then murdered the Briggs family and the ship's officers in a drunken frenzy. He felt they cut the bow to simulate a collision, then fled in the lifeboat to suffer an unknown fate. Of course, Flood completely ignored the fact that the alcohol on board was not potable, which destroyed his theory. Flood also believed that Captain Morehouse and his men were hiding something, possibly that the Mary Celeste had been found further east and the ship's log had been doctored. Flood just couldn't accept the ship was able to travel so far on its own, uncrewed. On January 15, 1873, James Winchester, who was the majority owner of the Mary Celeste, arrived in Gibraltar to see when the ship might be released to deliver the cargo. But Flood wanted a surety of $15,000, but Winchester did not have the money. At this point, Winchester realizes that Flood thought he might have deliberately hired the crew of the Mary Celeste in order for them to kill the Briggs family and officers as part of a conspiracy. Winchester ended up testifying to Captain Briggs's high character, insisting that Briggs would not have abandoned the ship unless there was an extreme need. Then scientific analysis of the stains on the boat and sword determined they were not blood, and the marks on the bow were not man-made, but normal wear and tear from years on the sea. She literally ran in and sank a ship, and ran aground, and has been all over the place, so I imagine there's a little bit of wear and tear on her. So Flood had no option but to release the Mary Celeste on February 25th, and she continued her journey to Genoa. The payment for salvage ended up being only 1/3 the amount expected, which carried an implication of wrongdoing despite the court's findings. So what exactly happened on the Mary Celeste? Where in the world did the people on board disappear to? There are many theories, from the simple to fantastic, to the believable, to the completely unbelievable. We're going to cover them all. One of the most popular is that there was in fact foul play involved. It was suspected that John Winchester had concocted an insurance fraud scheme based on the fact that the Mary Celeste was heavily overinsured. But Winchester refuted these claims, and the insurance companies didn't feel the need to hold any inquiries. Meaning the insurance companies were okay with how everything was. If you know anything about insurance companies, if they have a reason to not pay out the money, they're going to use it. So they didn't feel that there was any indication that John Winchester was involved in anything not on the up and up. Another theory was that Captain Morehouse and the De Gratia laid in wait for the Mary Celeste, and then lured Captain Briggs, his family and crew, on board the De Gratia, and killed them all there. However, there are a couple of problems with the theories that include Captain Morehouse and the De Gratia. First, the De Gratia was the much slower ship, and second, she left the New York harbor a full 8 days after the Mary Celeste. There's no way that the de Gratia would have been able to catch up with the Mary Celeste before she got to Gibraltar. Then there's the theory that Captain Briggs and Morehouse were co-conspirators, planning to share the salvage money. This theory is based solely on the unsubstantiated friendship between the two captains. But if this was the plan, surely two smart men wouldn't make a plan that included such an intriguing mystery that drew everyone's attention. And if he planned to disappear, why would Briggs have left his son back in New York? Of course, piracy is another plausible theory. And who doesn't love a good pirate story? I mean, pirates were really bad people. They killed people, they stole stuff, they raped women. They were really not good people, but for whatever reason, today we now have them put on a pedestal, so to speak. They're romantic characters. Everybody loves a swashbuckling pirate. Jack Sparrow. Everybody thinks of a pirate as Jack Sparrow, who's a great guy. I guess. I don't know. I've never met him. So piracy is another plausible theory. In the 1870s, there were pirates known as Riffians that were active off the coast of Morocco. These pirates terrorized the Mediterranean, robbing Christian ships and taking the occupants of the ships as booty and selling them to the Turkish and North African slave markets. While this is one theory that, in my opinion, makes the most sense to this point, the issue is that there were valuables left on the ship. The only missing items were the ship's papers and navigational equipment, and of course the lifeboat. And the people. Pirates would not have left anything behind, nothing of value, especially items that were easy to grab and take with them. One of the valuable items that had been left behind was the captain's sword that was worth a decent amount of money. Another theory that came to be in 1925, there was a historian named John Lockhart who proposed that Captain Benjamin Briggs, in a fit of religious mania, slaughtered everyone on board before eventually killing himself. The Briggs family insisted that Captain Benjamin Briggs didn't have an ounce of violence in his body, and Lockhart ultimately apologized and withdrew his theory. But if you're a fan of true crime like myself, you've heard countless tales of people who seem to be normal, everyday, loving people, and then they snap. And while this family said that he would never be violent, they did concede that he was a zealot. So for me, this theory has some possibilities. I don't think it's the correct theory. I don't think this is what happened, but it's an intriguing one. I mean, everybody said Ted Bundy was a nice man. John Wayne Gacy was a decent fellow. Heck, John Wayne Gacy, didn't he make sandwiches for cops or something? I mean, they all thought he was great. And yet, what was it that they found in his crawl space? That's right, dead bodies. But he was a nice guy. Next, we have the theories surrounding the lifeboat. Some believe that the lifeboat was used as a temporary safety measure, where everyone piled into the lifeboat that was tied to the ship for some reason, and that the lifeboat became untied and separated from the ship. But it's not very logical to attach your lifeboat to a ship you're worried might sink or explode, and it seems unlikely that an experienced captain like Briggs would have taken part in such a panicked abandonment. There was a leading insurance investigator from New York in the early 20th century that discovered the rope of the lifeboat was cut, not untied, indicating that when the Mary Celeste was abandoned, it was done very quickly. Several times in the ship's log, there was mention of rumblings and small explosions from the hold. It wasn't unusual for cargoes like the one the Mary Celeste was carrying to naturally give off explosive gas, and the noises and small explosions would be normal. The thought is that a crew member, perhaps, went into the hold to inspect the cargo using a lit match, or just walked in there with a lit cigar, causing a larger explosion that blew off the hatches, explaining why they were found in the position they were found by the crew of the de Gratia. You'll remember those two hatches were found open with their lids off to the side. In a panic terror, the captain, his family, and crew piled into the lifeboat, cut the line, and set out to sea, abandoning the ship, thinking it was going to explode. Still, those experienced with captaining a ship said, if the Mary Celeste had blown her timbers, she would still have been a better bet for survival than the ship's boat. By ship's boat, they mean the lifeboat. If this was what happened, then Briggs behaved like a fool, worse, a frightened one. It wasn't the first time someone had shipped denatured alcohol, so I have to believe that its behavior during transport would be known, especially by a captain as experienced as Briggs, leading me to discount this theory for the moment. Natural phenomena was also provided as possible theories. First up is the possibility of a false sounding. If you remember, I mentioned a makeshift sounding rod found lying on deck that was used to determine how much water was in the hold. Some theorize that a waterspout could have formed, causing the damage to the sails and rigging, and the low barometric pressure it would have caused would have created false sounding readings, making them believe there was more water in the hold than there actually was, which would have made them fear the boat was sinking. There's mention of maybe a displaced iceberg, but that's just stupid. I mean, they're off the coast of Portugal. It's not an iceberg. And other ships would have seen it. There's also the possibility that the Mary Celeste was drifting towards a reef off the coast of Santa Maria, and that the captain feared the ship would run aground, and they all left in the lifeboat in an attempt to reach land. If the wind picked up, then it would have blown the ship back into open waters, and in turn swamped the lifeboat. An underwater earthquake, called a seaquake, is also a possibility. It could have struck, causing enough turbulence to damage the cargo, and creating noxious fumes. The open hatches might have been an attempt at airing out the hold. In their haste to evacuate the ship, they did not properly secure the lifeboat to the ship and ended up drifting out to sea. The lack of evidence of an explosion weakened this argument. There were several barrels of denatured alcohol that were found to be empty, but these barrels were made of red oak instead of white oak, which would allow for natural seepage. I hate that word, seepage. It's as bad as the word moist. They're not my favorite. In 2006, there was an experiment carried out by a chemist at the University College London that was able to create an explosion, but they found that there was no scorching, burning, or soot left behind afterwards. This showed that it was possible that an explosion could occur that didn't leave the expected evidence behind. There are also a couple of other theories that are not your typical mainstream options, like aliens. Some purport that the captain, his family, and the crew were all abducted by aliens. I'm going to discredit this by pointing out that if aliens were abducting them, I'd think it would be an all-at-once sort of thing, and they wouldn't be given the time to try to grab navigational items and flee in the lifeboat. Also, the alien theory was always based on the erroneous info that there was food set on the table like they were taken in the middle of a meal. But this isn't the case. That was actually false information. Then we have the other paranormal type theory, and this one is my favorite. Release the Kraken. I've always wanted to say that. I really did. The theory is that a giant squid could have attacked the ship. The giant squid exists and is large enough to attack a ship of the Mary Celeste size. It could account for the damage to the sails and the marks on the hull of the ship. The giant squid was, of course, thought to be a creature responsible for the stories of the actual Kraken. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I really just like the idea of a giant sea monster, so that's why it's my favorite. I really want it to be the Kraken. I really, in my heart of hearts, don't believe that it is, but I really, really wish it was. So what became of the Mary Celeste? After her whole encounter, trial, all that stuff, she was considered a pariah, and she changed hands a few more times before being captained by Gilman C. Parker. Parker conspired with some Boston shippers to commit fraud. There was a lot of fraud going on back then. Parker's and his accomplices loaded the Mary Celeste with cheap cargo, but listed it at an inflated price, then purposefully ran her aground off the coast of Haiti. The captain and crew rowed to shore, sold the salvage for $500, and put in an insurance claim. There was a trial, and long story short, Captain Parker went free, but died penniless 3 months later. One of his co-conspirators went mad, and another killed himself. So the curse of the Mary Celeste lives on. In August of 2001, there was an expedition that claimed they had found the remains of the Mary Celeste, but tests on the wood of the ship that was found determined the trees used to build that particular ship would have still been growing in 1894, a full 10 years after the Mary Celeste sank. John Dewis, the son of the original builder of the vessel, said, "This craft seemed possessed of the devil to begin with, but where she got it, I don't know." So that's going to do it for this episode. I'm kind of curious if any of you may have a theory or a favorite theory about what happened to the Mary Celeste, or what happened to the people on board the Mary Celeste. I would have to say, reading everything about these theories and based on the experiments done at the college that showed there could be an explosion from the fumes of the denatured alcohol that happened but then didn't leave any kind of evidence that you would expect, like burn marks, scorching, soot, or anything, that there was probably a buildup of fumes, that there was an explosion, and that they were fearful the boat was going to sink and they took their chances in the lifeboat. It's either that, I think, or the false sounding reading where there was a water spout and the barometric pressure gave them a false reading that there was more water in the hold than there actually was, and they were fearful it was going to sink. In those instances, I don't think they would have actually attached the lifeboat to the ship, because the ship would have just pulled the lifeboat down with it. I don't know. Nobody knows. We're never going to know what happened. And that drives me crazy. Anyway, if you have a favorite theory of the Mary Celeste, send it to us at lurkpodcast@yahoo.com, or send us a message through our social media. As always, you can find Lurk wherever it is you find your favorite podcasts, or you can find us at lurkpodcast.com, where we have all of our episodes and the links to our social media accounts. If you have a topic suggestion or a personal paranormal story, please feel free to send it to us. Don't forget, we have shirts and hoodies at lurkpodcastmerch.com. And until next time, keep lurking.